Our top story, travelers are frustrated, airlines are angry, and now some members of Congress appear to have had enough. They've certainly heard enough. We're talking about the federal spending cuts that kicked in about a month ago, the so-called sequester. They're starting to be felt now by the traveling public mostly so far, but just wait until the cutbacks start to hit food safety inspections, drug safety, and long-term unemployment benefits, and more. John Harwood joins us now with Washington with more on how lawmakers are looking to ease some of this pain. How are these negotiations proceeding, John?
Well, members of Congress have been buffeted by these complaints about air traffic delays, Republicans and Democrats alike, even if they expected them to happen because the administration, the Transportation Department said they would. So they're now talking within the Senate on the possibility of a proposal that would be voted on perhaps late tonight, perhaps tomorrow, that would reshuffle money within the Federal Aviation Administration in order to reduce the impact of these sequesters, reduce these flight delays. But it would only impact that element of the sequester, not the overall budget cuts that you referred to. The House would be expected to follow suit quickly because members don't want this heat much longer.
So why are they deciding to just deal with this flight delay part, John, instead of the whole thing?
Because that is the most conspicuous complaint that they're getting. Now, as Tyler alluded to in the lead-in, if in fact we see repercussions on these other areas, food safety, Defense Department, which is the subject to the highest percentage cuts, and it's huge dollar numbers. If members start hearing from defense contractors, then you could get negotiations leading toward a larger solution. But I talked to one Republican member of Congress this afternoon who said, we're not close to that. We are drifting along right now, waiting on events. And the event this week was those flight delays.
What would any deal look like? You know, the Democrats have insisted that there be tax increases as part of a solution to the so-called sequester. Would that be part of a deal, or is it much more sort of quarantined than that?
Well, it would not be part of the deal that they're talking about right now that might pass this week to alleviate the flight delays. But if we get more impacts, ultimately this sequester hits home in ways that members of Congress decide they simply can't stomach anymore. That's when you get negotiations with the White House on a broader solution. And the White House and Democrats continue to say a precondition for having negotiations to alleviate it is we need some more tax revenue. We can't just do it with budget cuts alone.
So, John, talk us through a little bit on the timetable. What happens next? What would Congress do next?
Congress could have a vote by the Senate tonight. The Senate's scheduled to be in recess next week, so there's a premium, if they're going to do it this week, on doing it this evening. If the Senate would then act, then the House could take it up tomorrow, and then members would go home, certainly in the Senate, hear from their constituents and figure out whether or not there are broader impacts they need to address. One triggering mechanism that will come later in the summer is that the debt limit will need to be raised again. That could be a moment for a broader reconsideration of the sequester, not just the flight issue.
Well, certainly a topic we're going to be talking more about. Thanks so much, John. John Harwood reporting from Washington. Well, nowhere are those sequester cuts being felt more harshly right now than at the nation's airports. Thousands of flights around the U.S. have been delayed this week after federal aviation officials began implementing furloughs for some of its 15,000 air traffic controllers. The delays have ranged from 30 minutes to several hours, leaving already frustrated travelers fed up, and airlines worried about how these delays could impact their profits. Phil LeBeau has more on the turbulence from those furloughs and how airlines are navigating through all this.
How frustrating is flying right now? Go to any airport and ask those who are waiting and waiting and waiting.
Of course it's frustrating. You know, anytime that you have to sit and wait when you don't plan on doing is never fun. Well, we'll get around it.
I don't love it, but it's a means to an end.
I didn't expect a delay, but when I did get a delay, I put two and two together that it was probably due to the sequester.
The FAA says furloughing 1,500 flight controllers has resulted in more than 3,000 flights being delayed this week. Today, United CEO Jeff Smisek said these delays are like pop-up thunderstorms. They're hard to plan for in advance. He and other airline executives are worried. If sequester delays drag on, some travelers may decide they've had enough.
I think if you're in a congested area like New York or Chicago, it could affect you. But I think what might happen is people will say, I'm going to put off the travel till this nonsense is over.
From rising fees for checked bags to the slow and cumbersome process of going through security to the changing rules that will make it tougher to collect and cash in frequent flyer miles, the allure of flying has faded. And yet, airlines are more profitable than they've been in more than a decade. This week, Delta, U.S. Airways, Alaska, JetBlue, and Southwest all had profitable first quarters, in part because they didn't pay as much for jet fuel.
Fuel prices have been a real roller coaster this year, but right now they're very moderate. We're very well hedged for the rest of the year.
As the frustration with flying grows, so do airline profits. An industry on its knees just a few years ago is now soaring. Just don't tell the travelers these are good times in the sky. Phil LeBeau, Nightly Business Report, Chicago.